Meditation has been shown in a number of therapeutic modalities to be extremely helpful in treating some issues like borderline personality disorder. And I cite Marshall Linehan at the University of Washington in Seattle, who has had enormous success in using mindfulness meditation in dealing with borderline personality disorder. Now there are a large number of therapeutic modalities that make use of mindfulness meditation as a palliative and as an assisting in people, helping people recover from various forms of mental illness, almost too many to name. And it's certainly very effective in dealing with depression and anxiety. Meditation has been shown in a number of therapeutic modalities to be extremely helpful in treating some issues like borderline personality disorder. And I cite Marshall Linehan at the University of Washington in Seattle, who has had enormous success in using mindfulness meditation in dealing with borderline personality disorder. Now there are a large number of therapeutic modalities that make use of mindfulness meditation as a palliative and as an assisting in people, helping people recover from various forms of mental illness, almost too many to name. And it's certainly very effective in dealing with depression and anxiety.
It's interesting that you bring that up, and it's interesting that we simply talk about mental illness. It should be known that illnesses of any type, the Catholic Church takes very serious, and the help, the curing, the assistance that anyone needs in any type of an illness is very important to us and important to our theology. When it comes to the mental illness part, we believe that that is an illness of the mind. And something, an illness of the mind where someone cannot account for or be necessarily be totally responsible for the actions they've taken. We do not treat it as a sin. That's going to be the biggest thing when it comes to the church side. We don't automatically assume that someone that has a mental illness has committed a sin. We also do not automatically assume that because they have a mental illness or any illness, that is because they've done something against God. There are those religions that may feel that way, but not the Catholic religion.
So Hinduism, in addition to talking about the divinity within us and within each one of us, also talks about the fact that the whole world is one family. It's a very, very important concept in Hinduism. The minute you start accepting people from different colors of their skin, from different parts of the world, as one family, acknowledging the fact that we are not different from anybody else, that right there helps you take the first step to come out of that loneliness, is to look at other people as your own. And it promotes, self-confidence that I'm not inferior to anybody else, neither am I superior, we're all the same. And I think that's very, very important. The religion doesn't talk about one specific reason. There can be many. It can either be from genetically, from the mother's womb, you can start having that problem. It can happen because of a domestic abuse. That was asked in Preet's question. Severe cases of mental illnesses are actually happening because of the abuse that is happening around you. And Hinduism particularly talks about that the DNA, each one of us has a DNA. It is said in the religion that we have control to modify our DNA through practice of yoga and through practice of different techniques. So mental illness can happen externally, is what I'm trying to say here. The mind can be subject to very harsh things which can result in mental illness. Mental illness, there is really no one definition in Hinduism per se. In all that I have read in the last few years, the one thing that I have gathered is that mental illness is defined, rather expressed as the ability of a person to not be able to use their intellect to their full ability. And that can, it's not only the inability, but it is actually from a medical standpoint, not willfully, because we all have intellect and we all choose to use or not to use our intellect so many times. But that's not mental illness. It's the inability to use our intellect to discriminate between good and bad, right and wrong, because of a medical condition. So that's where it comes from. The very first important view that the religion talks about is when somebody in your family or in your circle is suffering from mental illness, is to show compassion, is to show love, is to accept them and make them feel as one with you. That's the first and most important thing that Hinduism talks about, is to accept these people, accept that it can happen to anybody, including yourself, and then go about helping them lead a better life. So that's what the Hindu way of life is. Mental illness, there is really no one definition in Hinduism per se. In all that I have read in the last few years, the one thing that I have gathered is that mental illness is defined, rather expressed as the ability of a person to not be able to use their intellect to their full ability. And that can, it's not only the inability, but it is actually from a medical standpoint, not willfully, because we all have intellect and we all choose to use or not to use our intellect so many times. But that's not mental illness. It's the inability to use our intellect to discriminate between good and bad, right and wrong, because of a medical condition. So that's where it comes from.
So Islamic teachings refer to mental illness as a fact of life for some people. Either they're born with it or they lead themselves into it based on depression or a medical situation that might occur. And it might be cured or reduced in its capacity of limiting a person to live a normal life based on a connection with their Creator to the best of their ability. So family members and practitioners can not only use medical practical uses and tools, but they can also use verses from Scripture on recitation in front of the victim or the patient in order to slowly maybe calm them down and to allow that deviation away from that mental illness to take place. But for some people it might be a terminal thing, but that's why Islam limits any type of responsibility for a patient from being recognized away from any type of spiritual duties. So a mentally ill person who is medically being acknowledged as limited on that capacity is not required to pray, to fast, to do a lot of the practices of Islam because he or she is not conscious of what they're doing. So they are exempt from those teachings.
Judaism has, from very early on, recognized that there are people who experience or have experienced difficulties. But in many earlier years, the main concern about mental illness had to do with decision making. Was the person capable of making a decision? And because marriage and families were so important, they focused around their ability to make a decision related to getting married in the first place. Could they make such a decision? And if it came to divorce or separation or whatever, which was not very typical at all, but could they do this in a rational manner and perform it? Over time, it became a concern whether other decisions, whether they have to do with other life decisions and whatever, could the person be capable of doing it? One of the things that Judaism very much stressed was not to label someone because of a mental illness and not to in any way shun them. Now, what ended up happening, however, realistically on a day-to-day practical basis is that people with their own fears would often shun somebody with a disease or with a mental illness because they were fearful for themselves. It wasn't so much toward that individual, it made them scared for themselves what might happen. And so shunning did happen. And it's more in our modern society that has now changed. And again, because of something I mentioned related to an earlier question, because Judaism so much is tied in with science and medical practice, that the whole idea of going for counseling and not taking that as a negative has also been more accepted in the general society, and Judaism has accepted it widely because of that also. So there's very much encouragement. If someone comes to a rabbi and says they're having difficulty, to be encouraged to go to a professional for counseling.
So Hinduism, in addition to talking about the divinity within us and within each one of us, also talks about the fact that the whole world is one family. It's a very, very important concept in Hinduism. The minute you start accepting people from different colors of their skin, from different parts of the world, as one family, acknowledging the fact that we are not different from anybody else, that right there helps you take the first step to come out of that loneliness, is to look at other people as your own. And it promotes, self-confidence, that I'm not inferior to anybody else, neither am I superior, we're all the same. And I think that's very, very important.
They are actually starting to open up their own clinics, and people who are not Native American. By the way, Native Americans don't consider you non-Native. If you're born in America, you are a Native American. It's in your heart. That's where it lies. If you can respect nature and do these things, you are considered a part of them. But they are opening up clinics that I just recently found out about, where people who have mental illness can go to them and work with shamans instead of with pharmaceutical doctors. And with mental illness of all different types, things that we would call mental illness, they call it a transitional state into the spirit world. So it's not really something to be afraid of or something to be ashamed of. It's not something that you push people into nursing homes and get them out of sight. Believe it or not, a lot of the medicine men and a lot of the medicine women will actually sit down with them and sometimes take them away from society and stay with them for long periods of time and help them overcome emotional issues that might be causing the mental illness. A lot of times nutrition can be a source of mental illness, so a lot of times mental illness can actually be fixed. And the medicine wheel is one of those tools that they would use to address that, to simply find imbalances in the person's life and try to find those balances. And when you start balancing things in the person's life, a lot of the mental illness would go away. But there's not this stigma about it being a bad thing. They don't, you don't prescribe drugs for mental illness. It's strictly a mental problem, and they do work with them.
Okay.
And with mental illness of all different types, things that we would call mental illness, they call it a transitional state into the spirit world. So it's not really something to be afraid of or something to be ashamed of. It's not something that you push people into nursing homes and get them out of sight. Believe it or not, a lot of the medicine men and a lot of the medicine women will actually sit down with them and sometimes take them away from society and stay with them for long periods of time and help them overcome emotional issues that might be causing the mental illness. A lot of times nutrition can be a source of mental illness, so a lot of times mental illness can actually be fixed. And the medicine wheel is one of those tools that they would use to address that, to simply find imbalances in the person's life and try to find those balances. And when you start balancing things in the person's life, a lot of the mental illness would go away. But there's not this stigma about it being a bad thing. They don't, you don't prescribe drugs for mental illness. It's strictly a mental problem, and they do work with them.
Okay. On mental illness, I would say that is an issue that is progressing. It is an issue that has not been dealt with properly within the church, in my opinion. So let me just kind of break that down a little bit. I would say there has been a prevailing belief within many people within the church that mental illness is more of a spiritual thing, and mental illness is more of a person being demon possessed. And so what will happen in churches a lot, we'll have, well, in the Catholic Church they'll call them exorcisms. But I would say within Protestantism we'll have sessions of prayer meetings and have, the laying on of hands and just try to pray and just cast demons out of people, thinking that what this person is going through is demon possession. And the reality of it is mental illness, true mental illness, is people thinking, acting, and doing things that they have no control over because there is a sickness within the neurological aspect of their body. And the reality of it is some things require medicinal intervention, psychological therapy, and in the church, we have not embraced that as much as possible because we say, oh, just have faith, just believe God, let's just pray. And the reality of it is somebody can be bipolar, somebody can have PTSD, somebody can have ADHD or ADD or have any kind of mental challenge. and it's not a bad thing in and of itself. Hey, we all have some issues. I have glasses I got to put on that correct my eyes. I take medications for other things. I don't have mental health issues, but there are people that do. And I think the church needs to move to more of a place of compassion. First of all, understanding that this is a true issue, have compassion on that individual, and not just providing spiritual care in terms of praying, but also finding ways in which we can provide real help for that person, which is either encouraging them to go to a counselor, a psychologist, psychiatrist, get them the help that they need from a holistic perspective. And I think until the church, first of all, owns up to the idea that these kinds of issues exist, then we can address mental health issues properly. But I don't think up to this point the church has done a good job to address mental health concerns.